A person translating a poem about heartbreak does more than match synonyms. They draw on physical sensations. Writing on July 4th, Krupa Shandilya suggests that AI fails at this work because a machine lacks a body to feel the weight of a word or the sting of a memory. Something interesting emerges when this is set against a report from earlier this week about the Orion space capsule. For NASA, the human body is the central problem to solve, requiring massive heat shields to protect a pilot from the fire of re-entry. It's worth pausing on how one field sees the body as the source of meaning, while another sees it as fragile cargo to be kept safe.
A machine can process a legal document in seconds, but it stumbles when faced with the ache of a 1950s Urdu poem. Writing earlier this month, Krupa Shandilya, The Conversation, looks at why AI fails to capture the unfulfilled longing found in the work of Faiz Ahmed Faiz. Notice how she uses a single 1953 poem about a secret meeting to show that true translation requires a body and a history.
For centuries, people have dreamed of undoing Babel. Sci-fi novelists envisioned universal translators, and linguists devised international languages, all in pursuit of a world where one person could speak and another could understand, regardless of where either was born. Artificial intelligence appears to be taking humanity one step closer toward that goal. AI-powered tools are already being widely used by lawyers to translate legal documents from one language to the next. The mass-market romance publisher Harlequin has turned to AI to translate its novels for international audiences. And hospitals are deploying AI translation to communicate directly with patients in multiple languages. The speed and skill with which these AI-powered translation tools operate are certainly impressive. But there is an important frontier for translation technology, one that it might never be able to breach: the poem. That's because translating poetry, thus far, has been a uniquely human experience. It demands intimate knowledge of two languages, which large language models certainly possess, but it also requires a mastery of different cultures and perspectives, what literary critic Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak calls a worlding of language and culture, pushing the limits of language. When scholars have studied the creativity of chatbots by prompting them to produce poetry, they've noticed that the poems tend to be more homogeneous and standardized than those written by humans. Chatbots' poetry translations have similar issues. AI seems to struggle in three main areas: rendering metaphor, decoding complex sentence structure, and creatively conveying mood or emotion.
To demonstrate these flaws, I worked closely with Adiba Shahid Talukder, an award-winning poet and translator, to write this piece and to translate the 1953 poem Mulaqat, or Meeting, composed by one of the most famous Urdu poets of the 20th century, Faiz Ahmed Faiz. Faiz was born in 1911 in Sialkot, in pre-partition India. In 1947, when that area in the Punjab became part of present-day Pakistan, Faiz became a citizen of the newly founded country, though his relationship with it was marked by both hope and disillusionment. He lived in different parts of the world for long stretches of time, but he returned to Pakistan toward the end of his life. He died there in 1984. His poetry is celebrated for its marriage of classical tropes, like the ache of unfulfilled longing for the beloved, and the lover's willingness to be consumed or destroyed in his pursuit of her, with the political struggles of his time, like the plight of working people and the dream of a Marxist revolution. His poetry is notoriously difficult to translate because of its highly ornate, extended metaphors, which have few easy equivalents in English. This forces the translator, be it human or machine, to push the limits of language. From 1951 to 1955, Faiz was imprisoned on allegations of sedition against the Pakistani state. His first 3 months were spent in solitary confinement. From Faiz's letters, scholars learned that despite the isolation of his imprisonment, he felt as if the experience made him more attuned to his senses, as if he were falling in love again for the first time. His time in jail was also among his most prolific as a poet, with Meeting composed during his sentence. When Faiz composed Meeting, he had been separated from his wife and 2 daughters for 2 years. He was keenly aware of missing parts of their childhoods that would never return. This biographical information can help translators understand the poem's exploration of Vassal, or the meeting of lover and beloved. A common trope in classical Urdu poetry, it usually captures the joy and exultation of the lover's union. But in Faiz's poem, the union with the beloved also contains an acute awareness of mortality and the transience of beauty, a recognition of what has been lost and the suffering still to come. That's why we rendered the opening lines of Meeting as, "This night is the dark, lush tree of a grief greater than you and I." ChatGPT's translation is more literal. "This night is the tree of pain." While there is nothing technically wrong with this translation, the chatbot's version doesn't capture the nuances of the tree metaphor and the way its dense, expansive branches can encompass the complexity and beauty of the emotions evoked by the night of the lovers' union. AI also fails to grasp the intricate sentence structure. ChatGPT has translated, "In its shadow 1,000 moons have wept away all their light," as a nonsensical construction. "Within 1,000 moons' shadows, and all my light has wept itself away." This error appears to have happened because the chatbot translated apna, a reflexive possessive pronoun in Urdu, as my, inaccurately parsing it as referring to the speaker instead of the moons. Finally, and most importantly, AI models lack the ability to express emotion the way a human can. A machine with no bodily experience of being human can't meaningfully perceive a poem so enmeshed in human experience. Its engagement is merely superficial. In its attempt to convey the mood of the original piece, ChatGPT offers, "From its dew in quiet, a few drops rest upon your brow and glitter like tiny diamonds." It's clear that ChatGPT is struggling to decode the grammatical structure of the poem and is trying to make the text lyrical enough to convey the awe and wonder of the original. But the model's contrivances toward the lyrical, for example, describing diamonds as tiny or glittering, have no relation to the original poem. "From its dew in quiet" is an incoherent clause. The phrase that seems to have thrown the model off is "Isi ki shabnam se khamoshi ke ye chand qatre," or "Its dew has rained drops of silence." Urdu literary critic Shamsur Rahman Farooqi has explained how Urdu poets treat metaphor as fact and then go on to create further metaphors from that fact. In Meeting, the metaphor of the night of the reunion as a tree becomes a fact, which allows for the flowering of a new metaphor, that of the dew on its leaves as drops of silence that fall on the lover and their beloved. These silences, heavy with sorrow, then adorn the beloved like precious jewels, conveying the idea that only a profound grief can beget such beauty. The model has failed at conjuring this sense of wonder because it cannot parse the poem in accordance with the literary conventions of Urdu poetry. ChatGPT prefaced its translated text by assuring us that it had crafted a lyrical, poetic English version of Faiz's Mulaqat, keeping the imagery, rhythm, and emotional flow intact so it reads like a poem rather than a literal translation. Yet, as we have shown, its translation fails to accomplish the most basic task of literary translation, to convey the heart of the original. Chatbots, in other words, are a poor substitute for the literary translator, and they bolster the assertion of the late Indian poet, scholar, and translator A.K. Ramanujan that only poems can translate poems. Krupa Shandilya is Associate Professor of Sexuality, Women's and Gender Studies, Amherst College. This article first appeared on The Conversation.
Krupa Shandilya, The Conversation, leaves the reader with the image of the poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz in a prison cell, writing lines that a computer can't quite grasp because it doesn't have skin to feel the cold or a heart to ache for home. The argument is that without a physical body to anchor it, a machine is just guessing at what a word like longing actually feels like. It's a sharp reminder that for all the speed of a chatbot, it lacks the one thing that makes a poem land, a life lived in the flesh. But look at what happens when the goal isn't to simulate a human, but to shield one. The next piece describes the Orion spacecraft, a vessel built for the sole purpose of keeping a body at a steady 70 degrees,
while the air outside turns into 5,000-degree plasma. Where Shandilya sees the body as the thing a machine can never truly understand, these NASA engineers see the body as the very center of the work, a fragile, breathing requirement that dictates every bolt and trajectory. The interesting thing is how the two pieces talk to each other. One suggests the body is the limit of technology, while the other shows it as the entire point of it.
Artemis 1's Orion spacecraft withstood the heat of re-entry in a critical test for humans' return to the moon. Now, NASA will loan the historic capsule to the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. The exact timeline for the spacecraft's display hasn't been announced, but the artifact will fit into an upcoming exhibition on how humans have built a long-term presence in Earth orbit and laid the groundwork for farther space travel. Tearing through Earth's atmosphere at 24,581 miles per hour, some 24 times faster than a speeding bullet, the Orion spacecraft endured harrowingly high temperatures as it re-entered at the conclusion of NASA's Artemis 1 mission on December 11, 2022. The capsule became enveloped in a cloud of electrically charged plasma, and its heat shield reached nearly 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or about half as hot as the surface of the sun. All of this was planned. As a spacecraft moves from the airless vacuum of space back into the Earth's atmosphere, the friction with air particles and the object's sheer speed generate incredible temperatures. And Orion was traveling extra quickly, more than 7,000 miles per hour faster than a spacecraft returning from the International Space Station. But even as the air around the spacecraft erupted in blazing heat, the capsule's internal temperature stayed comfortable in the mid-70s. One of the key goals of the uncrewed 25-day mission, the first in NASA's program to return humans to the moon, was to assess Orion's safety for future human occupants. Re-entry proved a crucial test. After Orion splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, engineers studied it carefully to see how it held up. They found that the heat shield had worn away in more than 100 places. But what they learned from the spacecraft offered a valuable lesson. It informed a new re-entry trajectory for Artemis 2, the mission that carried 4 astronauts around the moon in April. In the near future, that Orion capsule from Artemis 1 will go on view to the public in the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. I'm proud to officially announce that NASA will loan the Artemis 1 Orion capsule to the National Air and Space Museum, said NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman at a rededication event for the museum's 50th anniversary on July 1st. Artemis 1 was just the beginning, an uncrewed mission that validated the critical hardware needed to send the Artemis 2 crew on their epic journey of discovery and set up for all the exciting Artemis missions to follow. The details around the loan have yet to be revealed, but Orion will ultimately be displayed in the new At Home in Space gallery, which opens on October 30th. At that time, the exhibition will showcase a quarter-scale model of the spacecraft. After the loaned object arrives and museum conservation experts evaluate its condition, the space-flown original will replace the model. Quick facts: the Orion spacecraft. Orion was designed to accommodate most of the human population, able to host astronauts between 4'10" and 6'5". Traveling at its re-entry speed, Orion could make a flight between Los Angeles and New York City in just 6 minutes. A commercial flight takes about 5.5 hours. Conversations about the loan have been ongoing for many years between the museum and NASA, says Jennifer Levasseur, a curator in the Space History Department. The planning process to acquire an Artemis spacecraft for this gallery began before Artemis 1 even flew. Levasseur estimates that the museum will close the gallery for about 6 weeks to install Orion sometime in 2027. Other objects must be moved out of the way to clear a path for the spacecraft. We have an engineering study already to show us exactly how to get it into the building and how to rotate it to get it through the entryway to the gallery, Levasseur says. The At Home in Space exhibition examines the post-Apollo era of spaceflight and the journey to determining how humans might attain a long-term presence in space. It details the space shuttle programs and the International Space Station, even featuring an immersive walk-through mock-up of the station's Destiny module, which hosts the American research projects. It also features the Artemis program. When the museum was developing this gallery, it was really important that we represented the next step in human spaceflight, says Emily Margolis, curator of contemporary spaceflight. The Orion capsule is the perfect representation of what happens next. Standing in front of the full-size spacecraft helps visitors understand the humanity behind it, Margolis says. You can imagine what it's like for a crew to be inside of there and to be very, very far away from home. The Orion capsule from Artemis 1 transported 3 mannequins that were meant to collect data on how the flight would affect the human body, notably a female body, as the Artemis program prepared to send the first woman to the moon.
One of the mannequins, named Commander Munikin Campos by a public vote, honored the NASA engineer Arturo Campos, who played a key role in delivering the Apollo 13 astronauts to safety in 1970 after an oxygen tank malfunction. The other 2, named Zohar and Helga, were mannequin torsos made with slices of plastic that simulated soft tissues, bones, lungs, and female organs. During the Artemis 2 mission, a second Orion spacecraft carried astronauts on their lunar flyby. After the capsule and its 4 crew members safely splashed down in the Pacific, NASA mission specialist Christina Koch was photographed giving Orion a hug. Additional Orion spacecraft will fly in the future, and they are intended to be reused. In the Artemis 4 mission, slated for no sooner than 2028, an Orion capsule will carry astronauts on their mission to return to the lunar surface. At some point, I think the museum would certainly hope to permanently collect the spacecraft that was of the most historic significance in the Artemis program, and that hasn't flown yet, Levasseur says. Previously, the museum waited for several years to acquire Discovery, the most used vehicle in the space shuttle program. In the meantime, it displayed Enterprise, the first space shuttle to be built. So this is a familiar territory for the museum, she adds. When Orion takes its place in the gallery, it will sit among halls that host representations of some of the biggest accomplishments in aerospace history, from the original Wright Flyer that made the first sustained and powered flight to the Apollo 11 command module that carried the first humans to walk on the moon. Each of these achievements began with an idea that many thought was impossible, Isaacman said. This is why places like this museum matter so much. They tell the story of great triumphs of years past and instill the confidence that we can do it again, only better than ever before.
A pilot strapped into a seat feels the shake of a rocket. A poet feels the weight of a word in their throat. Both moments depend on having a body that can hurt, sweat, and breathe. Engineers build shields to protect skin from fire, yet a machine can't understand a funeral because it has never shivered. What lingers is the thought that feeling is the only way to know. If a body is required to survive a launch and to carry a poem, how much of the world is closed off to anything without skin?